Hello and welcome to Catch Up to Contenders, which was a podcast idea that I came up with because I wanted to watch Contenders but didn't know what the fuck was going on. So I thought maybe I should get in touch with some of the experts who cast or analyze, or in future episodes as well. I'll probably have some people on that kind of work in journalism behind the scenes, maybe for Korea, which I think will be the next episode. But this one is focused on Europe, as you'll be able to tell from the title if I've done my job properly, and from the beautiful faces you have in front of you as well. So I'll let them introduce themselves, but we have the casting partner from England whose beautiful voices soothe my ears after many weeks of listening to Mitch's grating Australian accent and Matt Morello, who weirdly is not the one calling everyone fam, although I think that's an American thing more than an Aussie thing. It's Trid and Desitu. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on to talk about Contenders. I'm enjoying my time. Got a couple more weeks left, and it's been Gucci so far.
And
What
then,
he said.
yeah, what he said. Is that the way your casting duo works? You just parrot everything that Trid
Sometimes.
says?
Yeah, we had a bit of a realization a couple of weeks ago that on desks we sometimes repeat each other. So we thought let's sack it off and just let each other speak for each other. So as long as he doesn't insult me, I'll let it fly.
I thought you were going to go the other way there and just say that you were going to come up with a bit where Desitu's just a parrot that just says everything that Trid says afterwards, like an echo that's in the room. All right, and then at the end, because for some reason I've put you on the end, I put the casting duo in the middle, like they could be inseparable. Is Sam Techgirl, right? Which was who is the host of the European desk as well. And I understand you guys have been living in Kiev while you do the Contenders broadcast. What's it been like living in Kiev?
You mean living with all of these guys? I mean, it's different. It's an experience. Nah, it's tons of fun. It always is fun. And I think it's really cool because for the whole season, we all just get to hang out together. So it's a fun way to bond, I suppose. Is that the right word to use? Bond?
Yeah, I think so. I think it probably is. I don't know what's been going on, but maybe. I've no idea.
Sadly,
couldn't
Sam only goes as extravagant as City Tour, sadly, and that's about it.
Yeah. Oh, so you guys have been casting Contenders in and out. You did that the previous season as well, and now this season. So I'm going to consider you the experts on the European scene at the very least. Trid's shaking his head. He's on the wrong podcast.
I'm not the expert.
And you're a third of the way through the season so far. So how has this season been? How does it compare to the one before?
I think that this season's actually been tons of fun because it's a much more powerful group of teams in the sense that they all just seem to have like up their level so much coming into season 2, but also because there's no very clear front runners. I mean, there are, but there's more than what there were in season 1. So you've got like 3 or 4 teams that are looking really powerful as opposed to sort of the 2 very powerful teams we saw in season 1 with a couple of dark horses. That makes it more exciting for me anyway.
Yeah, we had Giganti and Hurricane in season 1, who were the kind of big teams, and no one else. Like a couple of teams kind of sniffed closer to them, but this season, Giganti's still kind of up there. Hurricane are going through a bit of trouble at the minute, but the big names everyone's speaking about at the moment, at least, is Angry Titans, with CIS Hope kind of sniffing at the top end of Group B as well.
And Team Giganti. Don't forget about
it. Yeah, can't forget your boys in Giganti, can we?
They're undefeated in series. You can't.
Mate, but where's the tie? If you're gonna rep them and talk about them, you got to wear the tie.
I didn't bring it out to Kiev with me.
That tie is dope as well. I actually forgot that when we were casting Contenders the first time, their manager walked in and he just looked absolutely slick as fuck, like wearing this tie. And I was like, holy shit, Giganti have really gone all out, dressing everybody up to the nines. Then I realized he's literally just wearing the uniform of Giganti, which is an electronics company in Finland. So it kind of tarnished it somewhat for me because I thought they'd really gone out and made themselves look slick when actually they're just conforming to the man and just wearing the uniform. So I don't know, it lost some of its sparkle.
I gotta say, I felt honored to get that tie given to me at playoffs.
Oh, it was given to you?
Yeah, he's given to me, yeah. It was a reward for shilling for them for all season.
Okay.
The only reason they gave it to you is so you turn into a Giganti slave. They'll have you working in their stores next season in between games.
Hey, I've got a couple months downtime. I've got no problem with going to Finland for that.
I think they're going to take it away from you because in season 1 in the finals, Trid insisted on wearing it around his head at one point, which I was kind of like, so much for conforming to the man. Like he just took their uniform and kind of shook it up in his own weird style.
That's true.
Hey, when EU was beating NA, it got pretty wild. I'm not going to lie to you. Jameson got pretty scared.
Listen, when has EU not been beaten, NA? This is
Right,
my own little
right.
personal bias is coming into it here as well. Is that I always enjoy talking and looking at the European scene, and I feel like in some sense, almost in every esport, but not quite every esport, Europe gets a bit of a bad situation in terms of like the infrastructure or the marketing. What do you call it? Like budgets that people have to be able to put towards Europe. And it gets overshadowed a little bit by North America. And so it was kind of cool to see Europe come out and smack North America around, right?
Yeah, not only that, we also like one of the besides Korea, we're one of the largest exporters of players and talent. So not just across Overwatch, but also other esports. So always
Also,
against us, but we always make the best guys. We make the best players.
and also the self-proclaimed champions of quad tank, may I say.
One last ride keeps on rolling.
One last ride, boys, all the way.
Yeah. Now talking about quad tank, I want to delve a little bit just into what kind of stuff you've been seeing in contenders this season, and to set the scene for people. When you look at different contenders regions, even though most of the time they're playing on similar patches between the different regions, it's very different stuff that different regions are playing. I mean, some of them are just, I think they're playing roll the dice and see what hero you get on some of the regions. But for Europe, they tend to. From following Europe since the very beginning in the Overwatch scene, it seems to me that the people involved or something about the scrim atmosphere means that they find one strategy that works and they just slam it until someone finds out how to break it. And it doesn't matter whether they think they're playing the best Overwatch possible or like the most structured Overwatch. They're just like, this is working. We're going to hammer it until someone comes up with a counter. And often the counter is like the exact opposite. So you end up having wild swings in the meta from one side to the other. I mean, I'm thinking of triple tank and then triple DPS and then people playing a lot of quad tank again. It seems like these kind of what would be considered more cheesy compositions in a more balanced meta like the Overwatch League tend to find root and really be perfected somewhat by the European teams. So what have you been seeing this season of Contenders? Has it been more of that, or am I out of touch?
It's still a very tank dominant sort of meta, I want to say. Like we're in Overwatch League. A really good example, for example, is Garden on Lijiang Tower. Overwatch League, you often see Pharah Widow, but we're still seeing Goats comp on both sides. Whoever wins the point stays there, and then it's a matter of stacking ults and going for the fight. And last season it was quad tank. So it's all very tank dominant, but we are seeing teams like Hurricane run a lot of things like triple DPS. Iconvolt is the one that always comes to mind when I think of triple DPS. We're seeing Angry Titans bring out probably the best dive we've seen in Europe last week. So it's a very diverse meta. People aren't afraid to play different things. And from what I'm hearing about this week coming up, there's going to be even crazier stuff arriving. So it's going to be a good week for us.
Yeah, I was speaking to a bunch of the players behind the scenes, and they're adamant that Giganti and CIS Hope have multiple levels of strats that they pull off in scrims that are yet to see the light of day in public. But they are apparently extremely dominant, where teams just have no idea how they got beat, but they just kind of have to sit back and go, well, that happened. So there's still a lot of depth that these guys aren't showing, or don't know if it's confidence or whether they want to try and risk it in officials, but there's a lot of stuff these guys are working on behind the scenes they're not showing us.
I always think it's really interesting, though, that they aren't looking at the best teams in the world. I mean, perhaps they would. I know some people, like if you ask Hafikul who the best team in the world is, he'll say the British Hurricanes. He won't even mention an Owl team. It'll be like 3 European teams that they scrim against or something. But in general, it's always interesting to me that a lot of these regions don't look towards the best teams in the world and try and mirror their strategies. It's a lot of just internal. They kind of live within their own bubble and try and play what beats what. Is there like, are there teams that you think set the meta in Europe right now or are really pushing things in one direction or another?
Somewhat. I think especially when you think of the case with the 3-2-1 comp that we're seeing a lot in Overwatch League. This is the first time I think that we've seen Overwatch League teams run a strat. Obviously, the big counter to double sniper with the single Mercy healer. We're now starting to see some teams running that in Europe, but not every single one. Some are still trying to just smash tanks into anything and saying, well, let's hope it works, right? But for the most part, the big innovators in the scene, it's a hard one. EgoGaming is still running quad tank. They seem to be the only team that wants to run quad tank these days. Teams like British Hurricane kind of pioneered triple DPS and are still running it. Last season, they ran it a lot on Sanctum, on Nepal. It was kind of their big go-to. Aside from that, Giganti have probably been one of the kind of leaders, I think, in a way. They're the guys trying to employ things like the double shield hold on Volskaya, which did not work out in the slightest. But we're seeing...
Hang on. With that composition, I genuinely believe a lot of the guys on the team genuinely think that teams were going up against them in scrims and just losing to it and going, oh man, they really rolled us on that one, knowing full well it wasn't going to work in officials, because it has one absolutely blatant weakness. Just they sit in the hot on point A Volskaya, and then all of a sudden they wait for the Hanzo to build up a Dragon Strike, and they just shoot it through the hut, and they all get flushed out in chaos and die. It happened when
All right,
Giganti
what's the premise of this mad strategy that you're talking about?
So you take Orisa Rhine. The idea is that you rush point altogether. You take Zarya as well, so it's a very tank dominant one again. Idea being that if you drop your shields around, well, drop the Orisa shield and hold the Rhine shield up around the actual hut itself, you can still have a foot on the point to contest it. And you're very, very hard to fight out from inside there. So they try and chip away at you. They might send one or two out to come and dive you whilst you're trying to contest them from touching the point. But the big problem, like Trid said, is that Hanzo Dragon Strike is a thing, and well, it completely obliterates the comp altogether.
I do think it's kind of cool though with Giganti, because you asked who are kind of the leaders. I mean, they try these things that don't work, but I do think it's cool that they kind of come in and try those new things. And we've seen that a lot now in season 2. They kind of go, you know what, we'll throw something out there and maybe it won't work, but we'll give it a go. And also I think we've seen a lot more set plays as well. Like teams are clearly watching, or they're watching Al and they're going, okay, we need to do more set prepared plays, which again, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But I do think that the teams are trying to emulate what they're seeing on Al and bring it in. But then they like to just throw in some random flavor of their own, I think, where they think that that's going to work. So it makes it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Any unique strategy is always makes for a very interesting season. It's less interesting to see people playing the same compositions all the time with very minor tweaks. In terms of the big storylines, though, for Contenders Season 2, we mentioned British Hurricanes slumping a little bit, which is, from the outside, what I'm most interested in, because this team looked really good for the previous season, and as you say, up there at the top of Giganti, who haven't really slowed down, but British Hurricane definitely have. So can you explain that to me a little bit, and then any other storylines that end up tying into that?
I'll give I was going to say, I'll give you an overview that's kind of harsh, because I feel like Trid and Des might not want to go here, but British Hurricane is 90% chance they're getting relegated. I think that they really have to, I think they have to win. Trid's got the stats, but the chances are we're going to see our only academy team out, and that is the big story. They were the season 1 winners, and that is it. And then, I mean, from there, obviously, there's a lot of smaller teams that were dark horses last season and kind of sitting in the top 4, but are now looking like they're potentially going to take this. But that big story is that the season 1 winners, I don't think they're going to make it through. I can say that, but I honestly don't think we're going to see them in playoffs, well, in top 8 anyway.
I'm inclined to agree with you, because they've got 2 more fixtures left. And this week, they've got Angry Titans, who are currently in first, and I believe are yet to drop a map, let alone a series. No, they've dropped one map in all the contenders so far. And then they've got to go up against August and Hungary, who are in second place at the moment, tied with Snakes, albeit. But they're looking really strong as well, because they revamped their roster to make it all Swedish, and they've just been stomping people. Yeah, so they've got 2 tough opponents.
Okay, so what is the maths then? Because for me, if I'm looking to get into Contenders right now, and you're telling me that there's the slimmest chance of British Hurricane getting in, I'm going to want to be tuning in for these matches, actually, just to spam the fact that Hafikul's choking in playoffs. But apart from that...
That's the biggest problem, though. They're not, like, to me anyway, and I know this is very outside because I don't know what's going on inside the actual team itself, but they brought on Nesh and Mikey A this season. They're running triple DPS compositions, which they used to do last season, but they're not playing Hafikul on a lot of maps who can play DPS, because he did it last season.
I see.
It's probably to do with the hero pools, but the team, I don't know if it's maps that they're picking for Hafi, but when Hafi's in the team, they seem to perform better just from a visceral aspect. And they're not playing Hafikul on all the maps. They've got Nesh, Mikey A, and Kib, all of them locked in instead of having a flex tank.
They seem to be having, I don't know, we did an interview with them after their 1 win, and I got to chat to Bucket, and his feedback was, well, they weren't actually happy with the win. They were unhappy with the way they'd communicated in the game, and that tends to be an overarching story with them, where they feel like their communication as a team is potentially off in game, and I don't know if that's affecting it as well. But I don't know what they're doing. It seems a bit strange, and they kind of seem to be trying the same thing each week, and they're just getting shut down. And like Trid said, we're not sure what the lineup is. I don't know what's going on there. It is kind of scary, though, when you think about it, because your season 1 winners potentially not making it through to the top 8 is is scary, but also it's really entertaining, and you should watch because it's going to be pretty hardcore to see that play out.
I
Very
think it
reminiscent
also
of the
needs to
World
be.
Cup.
Yeah, I think it needs to be reiterated as well that it's not, if you miss in the contenders format, if you miss top 8, you have to compete for your spot back into contenders in season 3. So an academy team will have to go into trial to compete against open division teams and other teams that missed out on top 8 just to get back into contenders. Like that's a pretty big story. That shouldn't happen in reality. Like you don't think about that happening at all.
And that's also enormous, I think, for an academy team like that, because a lot of the academy teams, in a normal system, it kind of seems like they would be franchised or have that spot or wouldn't have to be relegated because they have like this status as an academy team. But they're not. They're just any other team, right? They might have better infrastructure, better backing, more salary. But at the end of the day, if you're underperforming, you're out. And then you have to have the long struggle back into the season. So we've heard from Sam that she thinks it's a 90% chance that they're out, or not out, but going to have to play in contenders trials. What do you guys think? Do you think those are fair numbers? Are you going to give slightly better odds for your British compatriots, however many of them there are?
I'm going to have to match them because it's not just about like who they have to face. So they have currently 2 of the strongest teams in their group play in their final 2 fixtures. Bazooka Puppies are currently 0-3, so they're the only team with a worse score line than British Hurricane. So Bazooka Puppies are pretty much a write-off at this point because last season getting 3 wins was pretty much the golden point to get you into playoffs. And Bazooka Puppies now can't do that in group stage, although they might. They can't do it, I don't. British Hurricane, they want a 1-2 score line. It's not just them they have to worry about. They have to compete against pretty much Young and Beautiful, who are in a similar boat. The problem is Young and Beautiful have already beaten them and have a better map score by 1 map. So unless British Hurricane gets massive amounts of map wins, even in their losses, and Young and Beautiful perform similarly on a series basis, if their map score is identical, Young and Beautiful beat them out for that 4th spot. It's really tough for British Hurricane to do it considering the competition there again. Unless they've just been in some time chamber and just elevated their gameplay in between these past week, it's going to be tough because they've got the strongest team in Group A, I think anyone would say, is Angry Titan. That's their week 4 fixture. And so they go into final week with with pressure massively on themselves because that 1 win, assuming Young and Beautiful haven't already got an extra win in their bag, could decide whether they make playoffs or whether they have to fight for trials.
We'll know this week,
unlikely.
plain and simple. I think plain and simple this week, they have to lose. It's as silly as it sounds, they lose to Angry Titans 3-2, or they're in a lot of trouble because realistically, Young and Beautiful are probably going to beat Bazooka Puppies, and then in the final week, they're against Snakes. And Snakes at the minute, asking their main DPS player, he's the guy everyone's speaking about. He looks incredible. He's basically guaranteed a team at this point for Overwatch League, I think, because the guy is just that good. But if you assume even in the case where British Hurricane lose to Angry Titans and then win their game in the final week, and we see Young and Beautiful win their game this week and lose next week against Snakes, they're still in the situation where, like Trid said, they're down a map and in the head-to-head they're losing. So British Hurricane have got to get 2 maps tomorrow and rely on Young and Beautiful losing a series to be able to get in, or something else crazy goes wrong with Snakes. But the chances of all those things happening, they're relying on external fixtures. And we saw what happened to teams last season who relied on that. It just did not work out for them at all.
So you've gone into a bit about like what they need to do to be able to get back into it. But it seems like the mistakes have already been made from British Hurricane, right? They've lost series that they probably shouldn't have lost. So what was going wrong with them? What's the difference between them when they were dominating back in the previous season and what you saw from them so far? We're like a third of the way in over the course of the entire season, including the playoffs and everything. So what's been happening?
I think the meta hasn't been kind to them. I think you notice it most through fusions, I think, and it's not a case of fusion underperforming. It's that fusions is when he plays Winston, he's trying to clear space by pressuring the enemy snipers. He's often doing it alone. And the target calling in this meta when you run against double sniper is very different to what it was in Contenders Season 1, where it was just a case of, okay, we're going to kill this guy, everyone just jump on him and body him. It's slightly different now. And I think it requires a little bit more tact with the comms and coordination, because there's a lot of times you see fusions being left out to dry by himself. And I don't think that's on him necessarily. I think that's how the team's communicating and playing. I think that's one of the biggest issues is that I think just watching how they play, there are some comms issues there.
I think another big impact of it as well is when you I remember one match. I think these guys will both remember it very well. The Giganti versus Hurricane matchup. It was the huge match we were all looking forward to last season. And it basically turned into quad tank versus quad tank, triple tank versus triple tank the whole time. And Giganti were playing it incredibly well, but just could not beat Hurricane's coordination time and time again. They were in the same group last season, which is why it was quite interesting back then. So some kind of said, Hurricane have probably got an easier group this time around, but they're just struggling to beat teams that realistically they should beat. And Trib mentioned it there pretty well with Fusions. They're running things like triple DPS, and you'll see Fusions solo dive into 3, die, and then it's like, well, we've got no tank now. We're screwed, basically. And that seems to be the running thematic for the guys. And you watch a couple of their maps, again, on Command Center back in week 2, I think it was. They dropped to Graviton Surge, caught 4, and there was 0 follow-up. They lost members off the back of their own combo trying to come through. And it just seems that the coordination either isn't it there with the team. I don't know if it's internal struggles or they're just not, they haven't got a single shot caller anymore. It could be the kind of thing that we're seeing from a lot of other teams where coaches have said these days, it's not just saying, right, Zenyatta, jump on him, kill him, that's the end of that. It's all about information passing now. Where are the snipers? Where are the supports? You need to feed it back to your main shot caller before you make those picks. And I think they're just struggling to fit round to that sort of way of thinking, I think. And they reckon they're getting close. All the players after last week when they lost, as you know, it's frustrating. We're doing really well in scrims. We're starting to fix these issues. They know they've got to fix it this week, but unlucky for them, they've got probably the hardest matchup in the whole group.
I do think, though, when we look at that first loss to It Was Young and Beautiful, where we actually said British Hurricane, it's not that they look weak. It's not that you're watching them. I mean, they don't look the same as what we saw last season, but at the same time, it's not that they look horribly weak. I just think that the other teams have figured out their number, are potentially communicating a bit better. And also, I think that the other teams after season 1, especially I know for those 4 teams that were at LAN, so British Hurricane wins, they take a nice break. I think the other 3 teams, as well as the teams who wanted to get to LAN, they took the break between season 1 and 2, and they just put their heads down and grafted. And it seems like they've all come in far more synergized and together and maybe hungrier, which is, you never know, because obviously you're not speaking to the teams and everyone wants to win. So I'm sure all the players want to win, but I just think that some of the other teams look like they just have Hurricane's number and that they've just been potentially are just more in sync with one another more than anything else.
I think you also have to look at the schedule in the off-season because there's only one T2 tournament that's actually operating in between Contenders, and that's Pit. And not all of the teams in Contenders compete in Pit. And Pit, for the most part, runs on a different patch to Contenders and Trials, as they do sync up at some stage. So when you have multiple iterations of patches going on in the off-season, it can be quite difficult for these teams to find scrims against people they don't want to face because of tournaments like Pit, or they are taking breaks, so your scrim partners are limited. Some teams were able to go in and hard graft, like CIS Hope. We spoke to them and they said that as soon as finals finished, like the day after, they were back on it trying to work this meta out on how they're going to play it. I think that some players are taking breaks, and then also the T2 tournament schedule, as limited as it is, does hinder the practice in between season and really hinders the scrim environment you can have.
Yeah, and so the team that seems to have taken their place somewhat in terms of the domination, at least in their group, is Angry Titans, like you were saying. And this team did look pretty strong last season. You know, they were nipping on the heels of Giganti and Hurricanes for quite some time. They've got some decent up-and-coming players and players that we've seen in the past before, but something presumably has clicked pretty well for these guys to now be able to be playing at a new level. So how would you describe Angry Titans? If someone was looking to get like a feel for how this team plays compared to the rest in the league, what's putting them ahead of everybody else in Contenders right now?
Well, at the very, very start of last season, when we first saw them, we were like, oh, this team could be quite exciting. And they lost to one of the bottom end teams called That's a Disband. Everyone recalls them running Bastion on Village, which was just the bizarrest thing we've ever seen. But after losing that, we kind of writ them off and said, okay, well, you know, they're an okay team. They'll be middle of the pack. But as the weeks went on, you saw them start racking up 4-0s against teams you wouldn't expect. And before you know it, they find themselves at playoffs. And it's like, oh, these guys are the dark horse coming into this.
Yeah.
And I think, again, after last season, you know, these guys, they live in a gaming house. They all got on incredibly well. Their tank duo, they've known each other for, 12 years now or something ridiculous?
14, I think.
Something like that. They're regarded as one of the best tank duos in Europe. And I think really they just needed someone to mold and shape them a little bit better. They did have a coach called Lick, but then once he left the team, they got a no guy in called Packing 10. And I could be here forever speaking about this guy. I had a really good little story session about him on broadcast last week. He's just completely turned this team around by the sounds of it. They said it's like night and day compared to before. He's made sure our communication is perfect. Our strategies are on point. And you can see the effect it's had because every single map, even playing dive, this team were regarded as the quad tank team of last season. It was all they played because Urki was a fantastic roadhog. Now we've seen them playing everything. They're running the triple tank. They're running dive. Again, their Volskaya dive was super impressive. Probably the best I've seen in EU so far. And they're just rolling teams time and time again. And as it stands so far, only one team's managed to take a map off them, and are absolutely gutted they've lost one map. They wanted that perfect record going into playoffs, but it's not to be. CIS Hope are the only team currently 12-0.
That's a really interesting tangent then to kind of take down for a second, which is the idea of coaches coming in and making a big difference in the tier 2 scene. Because in Overwatch League, you had people that every team knew that they had to pick up a coach, right? But you didn't know which coaches were actually going to be great, and you didn't know which coaches were going to be great for your team because it was the first season and you're still trying to find everything. That's been a problem in the tier 2 scene and tier 3 scene for a while in Overwatch, is that a lot of coaches don't have the experience. It's a fairly young game, and so some coaches don't have as big an impact. And also, teams tend not to have as much infrastructure once you get down to the tier 2 scene. Maybe they don't have the salary to be able to pay for coaches or multiple coaches, or they're not in a team house. So do you think that this is a big thing that's separating Angry Titans, or maybe even some of the other top teams, from the lower end? Like the fact that they have coaches that are dedicated, the fact that they're in a team house as well?
I'd argue though that doesn't quite always. So I want to give you I'm such a fan of this particular team because CIS Hope and the other group who are sitting at the top who have also been undefeated. I mean, this is a team that came to they made the top 4 last season. None of us expected it. None of us called it. They arrive at the finals. They don't even have team shirts. They couldn't afford them. They couldn't get them made. So they came in just normal, like they've got these little blue Overwatch shirts. The most excited guys, because they're literally just a bunch of friends who all play. Some of them have terrible internet connection, and we've seen them. They disconnect in matches because the internet's so bad. But they made it to finals. That bug, just being at finals and being on a LAN stage, was enough for them that they said literally the next, I think it was a couple days after finals, they got back. They grafted at the meta. They've come in now. They're looking extremely strong. They've worked on a lot of stuff. They've ended up picking up a player just in case the internet disconnects, so that they can get a player in. And they said that he's probably never going to play, but he's there because we're not going to lose a game here. And I think they have none of the backing of any. They don't have a gaming house. They don't have any of that. They are just guys that are super passionate about playing. And they're performing extremely well as well. So I don't know if it's more about what makes you hungry enough to get it. Angry Titans has an incredible setup with that gaming house. We've mentioned Packing 10, but they've also got Radio Boy who manages them really well. I mean, I've seen online he runs quite a tight ship. But then on the other side, you've got CIS Hope, that is really just a bunch of mates who want to prove themselves, and they have none of that support. So I don't know if the backing in tier 2 is what makes the difference. I think it helps. But if teams are hungry and players are hungry, it seems that they don't care whether they don't have all that fancy stuff.
Yeah, and they did pick up a coach this season, but we spoke to them about Ilka's involvement in their team. They said he's basically there just to help manage the comms and tighten up the comms. In terms of what they're actually playing, that onus to decide that is on the players themselves. So this team is effectively operating without a coach, just having some assistance to help the comms along. And I think comms are really important in this meta. So the coaching is making a difference for some teams, definitely. But it's not the be-all and end-all of Contenders.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of wording it. But one thing to consider is that a lot of people will say the biggest difference between Contenders and Overwatch League is purely the synergy, the teamwork, the strategy. It's very easy, I think, to get a very mechanically skilled team and play your way through trials, through open division, through trials, so on and so forth, and find yourself here. No disrespect to the guys that we have org, for example, they've got quite a fresh coach. They're still quite a team that say they'll play what they're best at and they will play their way, and that's the end of it. So I think for those guys, a couple of their matches or losses have been down to struggling to adapt to the way that a lot of other teams are playing in Contenders. For a team like Angry Titans, where they've got a lot of potential, the players, they're smart. They're not, by no means are they stupid. They're quite intelligent, but they needed someone to really bring it all together. That's why you've seen such a great increase. But for someone like CIS Hope, where the players are very well disciplined, Sam mentioned it, they feel very lucky to be where they are with this opportunity, thanks to all the poor net connection and so on and so forth. They can self-manage themselves very well. But for a lot of players, that's not the reality. So like Trid said, for some teams it works incredibly well. For others, it makes a very minor difference. It just depends on the players and the setup, to be honest.
Something that's interesting about Angry Titans and another team that's rebuilt recently, August and Hungary, is how many Swedish players you've actually got in European contenders right now. Because at one point there was a ton of French people. It looked like the French scene was going to be really healthy and develop quite well. And then EgoGaming kind of took a bit of a dive, which I wasn't expecting even from the first season of contenders when the roster was announced. They underperformed right off the bat. You know, they never really looked like they clicked together properly. But I'm sure we'll get to them later on when we discuss how much the French team's going to get wrecked by Team Sweden in the playoffs or whatever. But there seems to be a wealth of good up and coming Swedish talent, both on Angry Titans and on August and Hungary. So talk to me a bit about this August and Hungary remake, because that at one point was like Cruz and various little off pieces. Tonic played for that team, right, as well, and it was skilled players that had kind of been left behind and not in the Overwatch League, but they didn't have the greatest of performances.
I think the original August and Hungary we saw in Contender Season 1, it's very minor in terms of how many teams are being migrated over to NA, whether it's for Contenders or Overwatch League, but I think the highest number has actually come from that roster originally. You've got Finzi, who went over to LA Valiant, and you've also got Cruz, who joined Toronto Esports, so he's on an academy team in NA, and obviously we've got an Overwatch League player from that particular Contenders team. But you had a lot of big names on there as well, like Shax made an impact. He was one of the standout players, probably one of the MVP candidates of last season. But the roster has been rebuilt around their support player Epps, and they brought in a lot of Swedish talent, a couple of players from other Contenders teams, but for the most part, these guys have been bouncing around T2 for a while. They just pulled them all together. They all seem to be really incredibly mechanically gifted, especially their DPS duo, Kevster and Casper. They're very oppressive when they're playing this game together.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of the names from being on various other small teams, and I recognize Denia because he's been playing all the way since the beta and was playing back in TF2 as well. But I don't recognize Kevster as well. So what's he like as a DPS player?
He's pretty good. He played season 1 in NA, I believe, with Trials. He was with last night's leftovers. They had I think they finished top in Trials in NA and then came into normal Contenders and finished last place. I think they were 11th or 12th or something. So it wasn't really the best performance for him. So obviously he saw the opportunity to join an all-Swedish team, and it was like, well, sure, why not? I remember we first saw him play, actually, and obviously coming into this, him and Casper, I think Casper's even more of an unknown than he is. We were all kind of like, okay, just how good, is it kind of more of a vanity thing having an all-Swedish roster, or are these players genuinely really good? Turns out Kevster and Casper are actually pretty damn good. Kevster, especially on Tracer, is super impressive. The number of one clips he's getting through support lines is absolutely insane, and that's what you want from a Tracer player at the end of the day. But as it stands so far, that seems to be their biggest reliance is on Kevster. If he doesn't pop off, then there's a little bit of weakness in the front line of the team at times, I think. But a lot of it's going to be what a lot of teams say is kind of a gelling in period. And the question we always ask is how long is that gelling in period that you need? Because Contenders is only 5 weeks long for the group stage. If it takes you 2 or 3 weeks to find your footing, like British Hurricane are currently going through, that could be too late by them.
What are your expectations for this team then? Because looking at their upcoming games, they've got Snakes and they've got British Hurricane. And at the moment, the team that they've beaten that's in the middle of the pack is Young and Beautiful. They lost to Angry Titans. They beat Bazooka Puppies, who, God bless Bazooka Puppies. They seem to always have a couple of players that have potential, and then just
just you wait till next week. Just you wait.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on with Bazooka Puppies, and all will be revealed in a couple of days.
We were actually reminiscing with the Owlcasters today about the time when we were casting Contenders and just bringing up old names, and particularly those who played for Bazooka Puppies. God bless you, Psycho Waffle, wherever you are with your beautiful sound barriers that ended up losing fights. I love you, but you provided me hours of entertainment. But yeah, what are your expectations then for this team, for August and Hungary? Are they like a team that you expect to finish middle of the pack, or be able to actually take wins off like guys like Snakes and make a run in the playoffs?
I'm going to put my neck on a chopping block. I think they'll beat Snakes, and I think they'll beat British Hurricane, just because we know Snakes has had a little bit of a shake-up as well. So I actually think August and Hungary will probably beat both. Sorry, Hurricane. Sorry, every British person. But like, I do think August and Hungary are going to have 2 wins by the end of the season. 2 extra wins anyway.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they perform because against Snakes, Snakes have just lost KDG, who's their Korean coach that has done, everyone speaks about how prolific he was as a coach. The players really got on with him and stuff. We're not sure of the reasons why behind all the scenes, but even just a change in backroom staff can completely change the mentality of a team. And I'm concerned this week that it might have an impact. And to be honest with you, this is as good a time as any to capitalize on it. Biggest problem is you've got a guy, as we mentioned earlier on, called Asking on there, who has been a god tier player last week and for most of the weeks, to be fair. And Zapri, who we got across from the NA Grizzlies, he also has been absolutely outstanding too. So between the two of them, they're a very, very powerful team. And I think their tank line is probably a little bit better than what you see on August and Hungary. So that might be the deciding factor in this matchup. But on the day, you just don't know which player is going to pop off, to be honest with you. It might just turn out that actually August and Hungary are the ones who completely run away with it. But I look forward to this desk segment, Sam. We'll be having a good debate on the desk about that one.
I think that I think it's more likely in the current state, unless, like I said, British Hurricane have found a hyperbolic time chamber and have just leveled up entirely, that August and Hungary will be able to take the win off of British Hurricane. Snakes, I'm not so certain about because we've, like Des mentioned, we've seen the carry potential of individuals on this team. If you want to see what Asking can do, just watch their series against British Hurricane. Just watch Eichenwald and Volskaya Industries. And the guy literally 1v11s the entire map. It's insane what he pulls off. So Snakes, yeah, it might be down to how their superstars perform, but I can see Snakes still taking the map off August and Hungary. I think August and Hungary, will see them in top 8. Whether they progress any further than that, it depends on the draw from Group B.
Yeah, they're going to finish 3rd or 4th, and they've got to face off against the top end of Group B, where you've got Giganti and CIS.
Yeah,
like, realistically, it's just not going to happen. I've just realised as well, Trip, we're casting this game between August and Hungary and Snakes as well.
Oh, are we? That's good.
So we get to sit there and cream over Asking a little bit more.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is he the best DPS player that's currently in Contenders?
Oh, it's such a hard question.
No.
All right, who is then?
Okay,
who
Sam, you seem so confident. Who is then?
Go on then. I'm listening.
I know that they're gonna slate me for this, but I swear that he is the most underappreciated. I really think Shadow is a superstar, and everyone gave him a hard time. Yeah, I know, and I don't care. I'm gonna take it. You can call me a fangirl, say what you want. He got such a hard time last season, and everyone was like, oh, Genji one trick. And now he's come in this season and he's played a stack of other stuff. But I think what's important here is how he works in that team. The Giganti picks him up. Giganti it's forced Davon to improve because now Davon's had to jump onto other heroes. Like we saw last week, Davon's Widowmaker is actually really good because he's been grinding it. But I just think watching Shadow be able to jump, I mean, he's from being the Genji one trick, we saw him on Orisa, we've seen him on Brigitte, he's moving around. And I do think that if you give him, maybe he's not the best DPS right now, but give him another few weeks with Giganti. And I think next season, if he isn't picked up, he will be a superstar because I think that team facilitates him enough to improve. And before, all we ever saw was him sort of popping off individually and not working in a team environment. Now that he's like in a team that makes him sort of listen and work for the team, I honestly think he's the best. And I'm just going to stay there.
The problem I have with giving Shadow that title is like last season and to a degree this season, he's a really resource intensive DPS player. He's not one of the independent ones we saw. Yes, coach, like the biggest problem we saw Young and Beautiful when he was on that roster last season for a couple of weeks was, yeah, you're right. He didn't play with the team. The team had to play with him. That was the mentality that was very visceral when we were watching these games. I'll admit, he's definitely grown as a player because Coach Seda from Giganti has taken the belt of friendship and beaten him into submission with it. Now he plays with the team, thankfully, and they do look a lot better for it. Shadow's definitely a candidate for it, but it depends on how I would assess them. Like Shadow still seems like he needs more resources than others to pop off. If I was going to give like a best DPS, it'd be a guy you can just let him do whatever the hell he wants and he'll carry your game for you. But Shadow's really impressive. I just think he's a little bit too needy of resources.
So
saying just give him time. Just give him a little. Just give the man some time.
I'll give him some time, all right, Sam. But Contenders is over in 2 weeks, right? Potentially for some team.
Got you there.
Is Asking the best DPS for you then, Trid?
No, I don't think Asking is. Asking's good. The reason why people are hyping him is because of the like I said, the British Hurricane match where he just really popped off, and that's probably the highest high we've seen from a player.
Okay.
But a lot of the problems we have with Contenders DPS or Contenders players is that they can have those moments, but they can also be really trash at times as well. Consistency has been a huge issue. It was an issue for Naga last season on Copenhagen Flames, where he had similar performances, but then he couldn't maintain that level. I want to see Asking hasn't had a bad game, but he hasn't met that high again. If he can meet the high he had last week, but in this week or week 5's competition, I could probably, keep him in that conversation. But I need to see more
who
of
is
him
it then?
to know if it's not a one.
Who is it then? You need to put a name to it. Someone must be the best.
Come on, Matt. Come on, Trip. Be a boy.
Uh,
Think of a name.
You've already ruled out Shatter and Asking, so
Shatter and Asking, I'm
work
trying
your
to
way
think.
down.
I'm trying to think who would be
Do you
worthy.
want to reel off a few names for you? There's Danye, who we've seen pop off. We've had
No.
Track, who has been incredible as well, to be fair,
One
when
week,
he's had
no.
his moments. Exactly. This is
No.
the problem, is consistency with every DPS player.
Yes.
But I think Asking's floor has been a lot higher than what we've seen from other DPS players. And every week he hasn't popped off and been the solo carry for the team. He doesn't need to be the solo carry. Some weeks he just sits there and plays his role like a good little soldier. But in some weeks, like we saw last week, when he was given a bit of resource, he had the Zen Discord orbs going to his targets. He had the Mercy Pocket on the McCree. He literally rolled through a whole team by himself. And that kind of capability to shine in those situations when you see the opportunity, that's what really creates a great DPS player. And we won't see players like Danye or Naga pop off when they don't have those opportunities. So it's quite hard to judge. There's no consistent player we see week in, week out and think, God, these guys are literally rolling everyone. Therefore, they are guaranteed to be the best DPS. A lot of it is about enablement, I feel, especially in a meta where 3-3 is very prevalent. It's hard for a DPS player to really shine.
Yeah. So is
I'm
that
still
it?
going with Shatter.
It's tough for me to call because of the consistency.
Sure,
I mean,
so you're just not going to answer.
I'm not going to
of course
answer now. I'll tell you what. I will give you that answer after week 5 when I know.
Of course you will, yeah.
You'll just pick the winning team. You'll just pick the
No,
best
I
player.
absolutely
on the winning
won't. If
team.
I think there's a DPS player on one of those teams who just really
All right.
was let down by the rest of his teammates,
He's going to go for He's going to go for a DPS. He'll probably go Shatter as well because he wants the full uniform this time for Giga.
No, I'll go for Davon.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, Davon, I'm interested in Devon. I'm keeping an eye on him. But on the point of Shatter as well, like what Sam said, is he has been a lot quieter this season, but he's playing his part as a team player, which is what I'm really appreciating about him. I just think, again, that pop-off potential has somewhat been removed now that he's not playing Genji so much. Don't get me wrong, he's had some fantastic games on Hanzo and Farah. Week 5 against CIS Hope, that's going to be his first real test in Group B, though. And I think when you see him matched up against Unfixed, that's when you'll be able to say just how good a DPS is, or if he's actually second to Unfixed from CIS Hope.
Okay, when I look at this Giganti roster, the first thing that springs out to me is Finn. Yeah, from Finland. What's this flag? What's this weird one that doesn't look anything like Finland? So
they're
was this team not speaking Finnish beforehand? Were they always communicating in English?
They were
think they were.
actually. Yeah, I did an interview with them, and they said after one of their wins, where they said they had to change communication completely, so now they call in English. But apparently, they were fine with that. But I mean, I'm pretty sure they'll just teach Shatter to speak Finnish at some point.
Yeah.
Very
He's probably
easy
got his
language.
application for his Finnish national, his Finnish citizenship is probably already in the process of being applied for.
Got that belt of friendship on the way.
Yeah, the belt of friendship there, reinforcing it.
So, what is one of the people that I want to talk about, and I think a lot of people will know the name of, and was bigged up for owl slots and stuff like this, especially for any Outlaws fan, is Davon, because he was almost the only player from this original Giganti roster that won the first European Contenders when they played it at the LAN, that didn't get picked up, and actually had a monstrous performance in the final as well, just slapped Misfits around. And did not get picked up. What has his DPS performance been like over Contenders?
I think Devon is phenomenal, but I think if you speak to his teammates, they'll tell you that the team speaks so highly of him. And whenever you see a Giganti player pop off and then you speak to them about it, they go, oh, well, Devon facilitated it for me. And I think he's phenomenal to watch. But I think what's phenomenal about him is the fact that he's able to facilitate other players, and they all say it, and they all talk about how he makes that happen. So it always makes me sad when this conversation comes up because he wasn't picked up, but he's played a really good game the whole season. I mean, like, and again, we actually on the desk were really harsh before his game last week, where we were like, oh, they're going to have to play a Widowmaker. Who's going to play it? Devon plays. We didn't say it, but oh, he's not very good Widowmaker. We used another word privately. he came out and he was phenomenal, and he was really good, and he was going head to head with the other Widowmaker, and he was just really good. And I feel like he doesn't get enough credit, because I think even though he's an incredible DPS, the one thing that he does is make sure that the rest of the team can shine as well. And I do think that players should be given more credit for that, because it takes a lot more to remove your ego and be able to step back and help your teammates look amazing, as opposed to claim that glory for yourself.
Yeah.
But he still claims the glory for himself as well.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, his thing when he played in the original team, Giganti, was just don't die. So that was his speciality,
Exactly,
was just stay alive the entire time, try and, shut down other DPS. You're not necessarily going for the glory plays like somebody like Logix was on the other side of it. So do you think, because the one criticism that was leveled at him at that time, but may not have really been valid because Tracer was so predominant, was this guy pretty much only plays Tracer. And then we saw him play a little bit of like McCree and other things, and you're saying that he's recently picked up the Widowmaker and looking decent on it. Is that a valid criticism of Davon, having watched him throughout the season? Has he got a small hero pool?
It was one of the things we highlighted coming into season 1, but like you said, it can sometimes be interpreted as a non-issue just because of the way the meta was at the moment, where you could literally have just one player play Tracer. Fine. We saw it a lot in Contenders as well. Davon was one of the better Tracers in season 1. Wasn't the best. I think the best was probably Shaq. But he was still really impressive. He had solo moments as well. But like you said, it goes back to what Sam was saying about the team, saying he facilitated this for me. He enabled me to do this. When it comes down to, I don't know, reasons why he might not have been picked up, it's hard to say. But with season 2 coming in and everyone having to really mix up how they're playing, he's now getting to show that he's not this one trick anymore. So I think that it might have been the case that he wasn't necessarily a one trick. It was just the meta locked him into a position where he had to play it.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, everything you said there about him not really being a shiny player, never wanting to die, that's still very true. And literally the way I describe him compared to other Tracer players is that he is not robotic in his play, but it's very calculated and very logical and mechanical. He won't go in and take high risk, high reward plays. He will always sit at that low risk level and consistently do it throughout the game to cause issues for the other team. And I think on Tracer, that's most evident. His Zarya has been fantastic. If you speak to RCK, who I know Trib would love to speak about at some point, every single time RCK gets off a big self-destruct on D.Va, we always go, dude, what the hell was that? And he's always like, mate, honestly, the whole thing is Davon. Like, it's always his grab surges. He's a very, very smart, intelligent player. And again, you said the reason like he didn't get picked up compared to everyone else on the Giganti lineup. I think a lot of that was down to that inflexibility until teams in Overwatch League started realizing that actually a Tracer specialist isn't a bad thing to have. And we're kind of seeing it's going that way a little bit more again these days, I guess. Like you think of a lot of players in Overwatch League, you kind of go, Widow specialist hands down, or maybe a certain tank specialist or a support specialist. Jonak is always the guy you think of when you say Zenyatta, for example. And I think with Davon, I think now he's starting to diversify. You will see more coming out of him. He used to play with a guy called Nil, and now that Nil's gone, he's starting to pick up heroes that Nil played, like the Junkrat as well. So that flexibility is starting to arrive. I still think it's going to be another season or so until maybe you see him at that level where teams from Overwatch League will start paying serious attention. But with the expansion coming, maybe that day comes a bit sooner.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about the French team, who are perennial disappointments for me, because I love French esports. Actually, I love watching French teams succeed. I don't know why. It's just something about France. They
don't want to watch
be...
EU contenders then.
No, exactly.
Don't.
Exactly. That's the problem. Is that EgoGame, when it was announced, looked like it had such a stacked lineup. For anyone who's been following the scene for a while, you know that Rogue was so incredible, and you know that guys like Pipu were very highly rated by the other people in the French scene as being very intelligent players. We've seen Leaf go crazy. Super Pluke looked like he had a good main tank on him for a long time. Flippy's a player that has like a past history in other games of being incredible, and then translated some of that into Overwatch. But I'm looking at this roster, and how are they unable to pull out a series of decent results? Like, what the fuck is going wrong with this team? What a tragedy for France.
Yeah, it's too inflexible. You look, they had the largest roster in Contenders last season and this season. The problem being is that they segregate their roster. They effectively have an A team and a B team. It was more evident last season where they would have their A team, which would play dive exclusively, and then you'd have the B team that would play quad tank exclusively. So the problem we have with EgoGame when we see them is they have all this depth, but they're not mixing it up at all. So you could look at the roster and go, oh, okay, EgoGame is going to play like this for an entire series. That's how it feels when you watch them play. They don't change it up by mixing up who's in like their A team and B team. I mean, one of the things that surprised the most, and we talked about it a lot, was last season Flippy was an incredible Widowmaker. Widowmaker's so dominant right now. Why hasn't he been in the lineup? Like,
Okay,
they're letting-
to set the scene
Yeah.
for viewers that might not be familiar with it as well, who's in the A team and who is in the B team?
Oh god,
Roughly
it was
speaking.
it was like Nico, Flippy were on. I think it was Nico was on DPS with Flippy last season, and it was Nox, Super Pluke.
No, it was Get Amazed. Nox and Get Amazed.
Nox and Get Amazed, and then Hip and Pipu were like the A team, and then the B team was Hardest. Oh god, Hardest Crew. Oh, I'm trying to remember all of them now. Leaf, Leaf was in there.
Super Pluke, Marine
Pluke,
Lord,
Marine
Lilbo.
Lord, and Lilbo. There you go. Des knows.
It was
But
Lilbo.
yeah, it was Lilbo. Lilbo was in the roster last.
Yeah. The problem with all of those players is they were basically one tricks. Like Super Pluke never played anything except for the Reinhardt. Like Get Amazed on the A team was a diva only player. We just never saw them change, and so you knew full well based on what roster was locked in for that week, because you couldn't have all 12 players rotated in. You knew what to expect. You knew what you had to prepare for. And even now, like this team they're running with this season, they've basically taken the majority of the B roster. They've moved Nico from DPS onto Flex Tank. They put Leaf onto DPS, where he's trying to play things like the Widowmaker and not really having the greatest success so far. And teams have just got them figured out. Like they've lost 3-1 to Giganti. They lost to We Have Org, one of the new teams in from Trials, quite convincingly as well. Their answer has been what we saw from season 1. Run quad tank. If it doesn't work, we lose. And that seems to be the way that things have been going for them pretty much exclusively here in season 2 as well.
I think Des summed it up really well. It's that they just don't adapt. Like you're watching them play and the other team comes in, sees what they're doing, just starts beating them. They don't stop doing that. They don't try jump onto anything else. They don't try shake it up. They just keep rolling, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's a really weird one because we hype them up as having this incredibly flexible roster and they could swap people out. And like Des and Trid said, they haven't done that.
Although I will give a bit of a shout out to Hardest, because he has been a god tier player so far for those guys. I'd argue he's been the strongest player on the lineup. His Zarya play especially, I would not disagree with anyone who suggested he was a top 3 Zarya player in Contenders Season 2 at the minute. The stuff that he pulls off is incredible. His spacing is great. He's pretty much always at 100 charge and burning through the enemy lineup as well, which of course is what you expect from a Zarya at this level. But the consistency and accuracy with which he tracks as well is winning his team fights that arguably they shouldn't win. And Eagles' biggest weakness, I keep on saying this on the desk, is they rely so much on ultimate plays or set pieces, as Sam calls them. Oftentimes, they'll wait for 2 or 3 support ults to come online before they engage with their 3-3. And a lot of it just comes down to Hardest doing his work with the Graviton Surge to make those fights work out for them. So I think he's probably a player to keep an eye on as well if you're interested in seeing the strong parts of EgoGaming.
Another strong member of EgoGaming that you want to give a shout out to is Hip. The support player. He's been a why'd you chuckle, man? He's been a really good.
I was just like, yeah, how the hell did I forget? The guy is
you forgot about Hip. Like
he's like a railgun at the back on that Zenyatta. God,
he channels Jonak on a weekly basis. This guy deals equal damage to his DPS in terms of kills as well. So he's phenomenal. Back on what Des was saying about like their reliance on ultimates, it's the same with support ultimates. They have this really weird. Not many teams in Contenders do it, but they're happy to run Lucio Zenyatta, and they obviously sacrifice the healing for the defense ultimate to play around. And not many teams are doing that. And I think that's only something that Eagle does.
I assume you're on about in the 3-3, right?
Yeah, in the 3-3, they'll do it with that.
Yeah,
they'll sacrifice the Moira and the Brigitte.
It's a really interesting conversation to have. They keep the Brigitte, but there's been a whole interesting discussion amongst coaches and so on and so forth around running Zen or Moira in the 3-3. You run the Zen if you want to try and burn. The idea being that you discord a target in the front line. If the Rhine drops his shield, he gets discorded. Otherwise, he's keeping it up and losing the 1v1 Rhine duel. Or you go for a target in the back line and your team just rushes through with Lucio, burns them down, you win the fight. Problem is, if the fight lasts longer than 5 seconds, Moira on the other side is going to win out and keep the team alive for longer and get her ultimate a lot quicker. EgoGaming just don't seem to have that kill switch where they go, right, Discord's on, kill that person right now. Teams can just adapt and kind of cushion the blow in a way. And that's always been a confusing point for me. When they run Moira, they do well. When they don't run Moira, they're losing these fights more often than not.
In terms of, I think we've covered most of the big teams now that people would be, looking at if they'd followed teams from previous seasons and stuff like that, or knew of players that they wanted to watch. In terms of the groups that we've got, Group A and Group B, what are your feelings for which group is stronger overall right now?
Teams would still suggest A is stronger, and I'm inclined to agree, but I can also understand the arguments for B being stronger. I think in Group B, you've got CIS and Giganti, which straight away you see two big names and go, right, those guys are stronger. At the very start of the season, when we saw Hurricane and Angry Titans, some would argue, okay, that's stronger, and teams like Young and Beautiful look a bit stronger coming into this than what the other teams do in Group B. Because I think in Group B, they've got both 1 Point and We Have Org, who are the two new trials teams.
Yeah.
Now that we're at week 3, though, and Hurricane are looking quite weak, it's very easy to argue either way. Group B, in terms of consistency, is probably stronger, but we're still yet to see a whole lot out of teams like EgoGame, like We Have Org, like 1 Point, for example. We still need to see more come out of those guys. And you can't forget the Copenhagen Flames are currently sat at the very bottom 0 and 3 as well.
So now that Des has given me the politically correct answer of, you never can tell, all the teams there.
Yeah, it's hard.
Trid, A or B, put your money down. Which side are you going? You avoided my question earlier. Now
I avoided your first.
Now you got to
question.
lay the money down.
One. I think Group A is the strongest, but I have to throw out a reminder that there was a great bamboozling in Season 1 where EgoGame went undefeated in group stage, and we're like, they're going to get through. It doesn't matter what they do. And then Giganti 3-0 them in top 8.
Yeah.
And we're like, that puts all the questions to bed. Group A was the strongest. Why I'm hesitant to do that with Group A is that we have CIS Hope and Giganti. Those two look like two of the strongest teams in Contenders, but that could be just those two teams. And they could be picking up loads of free wins from weaker teams as well from Group B. We don't know that because we have no comparison. The only time we get to see a real test is when these two play each other, which is the last game of group stage. So
that's going to be such a game.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good game, but it's going to be difficult to gauge the talent. But now my mind's telling me it's Group A is the strongest group as a whole.
Yeah. When you're looking at the team's strengths overall, and I don't know whether you follow other Contenders regions as well, but I assume you watch a couple of the Owl games or whatever. How good do you think these teams are in terms of the global scene? Because Europe does tend to sit in its own little bubble, and they did beat the North American teams last time, which I think would surprise a number of people. But I think that's also down to team style, right? When I was watching those games last season, when they had the EU versus NA, I was wondering to myself, if Fusion Academy have actually played against the more tanky compositions more than just a single time and had to really adjust on the fly, would British Hurricanes have been able to deliver the win, or at least in that kind of fashion repeatedly? And so when you're looking at Europe right now and comparing it to other regions, how good do you think this region is? What are its strengths and how would it match up?
I want to jump in here. Yeah, I think I'm going to say the same thing as Trid. So first of all, you have to understand that in that EU NA matchup, British Hurricane chose to run quad tank. And that was a conversation that was had before, because unfortunately for ZP, he was giving them such a hard time about how rubbish quad tank was. And how the reason you never see it in OWL is because it's rubbish. They decided between Giganti and Hurricane, before we had an EU winner, that whoever won and went into the show match would run quad tank on purpose to drive ZP mad.
That's fantastic.
I think the fact that a team can go in and play that comp, knowing that they're doing it. At one point, they said all they wanted to do was jump off of it, but they insisted on still doing it to annoy ZP. Speaks a lot about the strength. So
I think it speaks a lot about how much they want to annoy ZP personally.
And they did it, and it was fun. That was great. But I kind of feel like I think that EU is a really, really strong region. If I had to call it, I'd say it sits I think Korea is the strongest. I honestly think that EU is second. I do think it's stronger than NA, and I know that people want to fight me about that. I think the fact that we saw it in Season 1, but I think even now we can see it. The one thing that I think that the EU region has is that they are not afraid to adapt. They're not afraid to try new things, and they're not afraid to change on the fly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that sort of confidence to do that makes all the difference. And I think that that's why they ultimately are stronger than NA. Still don't know if they can beat Korea, though. So I'd put them in a second worldwide.
Do you agree with the Trid?
I think, to touch on,
because I don't. I'm just curious to know. I want to judge.
Okay, no, I don't. But let me explain it quickly. I think that Sam made a really good point there about the fact that they were running quad tank even when it was suboptimal to do so and still getting a win. a lot of that is surprise factor. I think if they were on the same meta and they would practice against tank compositions, they wouldn't have maybe underestimated it as such. Because whenever we spoke to the teams, we asked them about quad tank, are they afraid of it? Literally, most of the teams at playoffs just said, Junkrat exists, right? Well, they picked Junkrat and it didn't work. So maybe if they had more time to play against these compositions, they would know about it. And then you need to look about who was playing quad tank in NA, because there was a team doing it. I believe it was last night's leftovers, and they were just getting rolled. So the teams just assumed.
Do you mean the playoffs?
No, not playoffs. In Contenders in NA, there was a team that was running quad tank.
Oh, really?
And it was getting rolled.
I didn't know.
So
about that.
the teams assumed. I guess the teams assumed the composition was just bad. It was just no, that team was playing.
Yeah, that
quad
team
tank
was bad.
In terms of where they sit in global strength, I think because EU, like you said yourself, Josh, like EU's in a little bit of a bubble with its own meta. It's hard to get a good read on how they gauge up against other regions. I agree with Sam. Korea's the region of Contenders. They're producing the best talent overall, so there's no question about that one for me. But I think, I don't know. I think if you unified EU and NA for a season, I think you'd see NA players ending up on top of EU one in terms of just, I don't know. I think if they played against it more, they'd be better. But what you got to remember is as well with NA Contenders, is it really North American Contenders? I mean, how many Koreans and Europeans have they got competing?
You've been
there?
dying to say this, and this is the
Yeah.
only place you can say it.
You confirmed my argument. Korea first, EU second.
If they were actually all NA players, right?
Oh, they'd be trashed
Would it
here.
be the
They'd be
same?
the worst. They'd be like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So can you call it the best region?
no.
Right.
Well, no,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's classic North America. It's a melting pot, you know. They take
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
best
That's
of
the idea.
everywhere else. It's immigration first. You know, they're all about
Well,
taking in people that are
My
beneficial.
main contribution to that whole discussion is if you actually look back at the very start of the Atlantic Showdown series, British Hurricane didn't run quad tank at first. They tried to play dive against Fusion University. They got wrecked by Who Are You and Alarm. The pair of them just completely destroyed Hurricane. So then they went quad tank and started
Classic
winning.
NA players.
Right. They were very, very good when it came to dealing with it. I think when it was dive versus dive, because it's what they played against all season. And as a fun little insider, I know Toronto Esports, they were the first NA team to scrim against an EU team. They got rolled by quad tank and then tried to do it in their game after against an EU team. And I think the EU team went back to the first EU team, was like, did you play quad tank against these guys? Because they just tried it against us and got absolutely slapped by our quad tank. And they were like, yeah, we did. So it's kind of like they didn't want to give them any kind of freedom. There was that warning to NA there that these teams will run quad tank. They still couldn't deal with it. So, the Atlantic Showdown said a lot.
Yeah. I think also what impresses me about Europe is that it's still able to, even with less salaries and organizations and stuff like this compared to the North American region, it's not only able to remain competitive in terms of the teams or, and we can have this debate of who is actually better, which is a strange thing in and of itself, I think. It also seems to produce great individual talent that I think people would be able to pick up from either a lot of North American teams have tried to pick up bits and bobs of players, but then OWL teams as well have tried to pick up bits and bobs of players. And like we've got Philadelphia Fusion are in the finals of the Overwatch League, and they've got a lot of Europeans on their team and nobody from North America, or nobody from the United States of America. They've got Joe Meister, I suppose, who's keeping that bench nice and warm for them. So do you think that's still the case in Europe, that there's still a lot of great individual talent that has a lot of potential to be able to move on to bigger and better things elsewhere?
Yes.
I agree with everyone. And I also think, to touch on what you said, you have to understand that the majority of these Contenders players are not salaried. They're not living in gaming houses. They're not full-time. They're studying, they're working. And despite that, they are still on that level. Imagine if you pick them up and you put them in a place where all they could do was concentrate on this game. If they're doing this sort of part-time, for want of a better term, and they're playing this well, imagine what they do in a setting where they're paid to play and they can focus on it. So I think individually, any of these guys, if you pick them up, the drive there and the ability to focus on this full-time would make them superstars. And I do think that Europe creates incredible individual talent, which is why we're seeing more of them, more of the Europeans anyway, enter into OWL.
Yeah, I completely agree with that one. There's a lot of split attention out of necessity, just because the majority of teams, I believe, in Contenders are non-org supported. They are people who have got together and they basically said, hey, we're going to make a team, we're going to put it together, and we're going to try and make this work.
On that point, how many actually do have organizations? Because for some of them,
Not
it can
many.
be difficult. Because, for example, they have like logos and names that sound like they have
Mhm,
orgs, but
mhm.
there's actually no money behind them. Like, for example, Bazooka Puppies. I think somebody, one of the casters, I can't remember who it was, when we were having dinner today and we were reminiscing about the contender season, said, I think Bazooka Puppies spent more on their logo than they ever won in prize money, which I think is a fantastic.
To be
I think
fair, their
that's
logo
totally
is
true.
really good though.
It is. It's fantastic. It's fucking amazing. Like it's so good. It's so cute as well, and I love that it had like that Laser Kittens rivalry for a little
Yeah.
while before Laser Kittens absolutely just
Yeah.
demolished them.
And then
But
then it became Kazalittens for a bit.
but how many of them are actually organizations? I mean,
I
we
think
have org.
5.
Is that just a piss
5.
take as well?
Yeah, it is. Apparently they did have an org, and then the org pulled out when they got Contenders.
They
I
all
think that
pull
was
out.
the joke behind it.
No. I think the joke is they've never had an org. It's just
Oh,
always been a
right.
running joke,
Okay. But yeah,
rather than being like orgless or we want org or something like
it's 5, maybe 6. Either way, there is at least half the teams in there that don't have org back.
that.
So are we?
I'm not sure if one point do it's 6, otherwise it's 5.
Is
Yeah,
it Angry Titans, British
Yep,
Hurricane,
yep.
Gigante, Eagle, and Copenhagen Flames?
Yeah,
Correct.
those are the 5 I'm thinking of.
Okay, yeah. And so they're spread kind of everywhere across the table as well. Coming back to your point earlier, Sam, it does seem more like it's to do with drive or who's actually just got the better players rather than it being an infrastructure thing. I suppose when there's a lot of teams without a ton of backing behind them, it doesn't make as much difference. Or so it would seem from the table at the moment. Although last season, if you were making the same argument, it was British Hurricane and Gigante at the top, right? So maybe, difficult to tell at this point, perhaps.
Season 3 will be the true telling then, because then we'll have one where it was orgs, one where it wasn't. Season 3 will let us know what's going on with it. But I think that, the only team that made it to playoffs or at least LAN last season without an org was CIS Hope. And now they're top of
Yes.
Group B at the moment.
Yes.
And just based off of their map wins and their map score, they are guaranteed top 8. There's nothing they can do. They could tank the next 2 games and they would end up still in top 8. They're the only team who can actually say that right now based off of their maps.
Do you think then when you look at because we started talking about individual players and individual skill in terms of Europe, do you think more Contenders players should have been picked up for the World Cup? If you're looking at some of these teams and there are a lot of some subpar Overwatch League players, but from talking to the Overwatch League players, it seems to be that they really value that practice environment and the fact that they've learned so much about the game. Even if they've just been shit stomped for 6 months in a row, they've still learned more, they think, than the Contenders players have being able to win in their region or to be able to kind of like find out that. I guess it's like the test of fire and you came out and you were just literal ash, but at least you had some kind of information like still printed on you. So do you think there's players that have been left out of World Cup teams that you would have really liked to see in there?
I think Coach Seda from Gigante said it best, because he's coach of Gigante and the coach of the World Cup team. Because of the schedules, there's a lot of conflict going on, and it's about what he wants the teams to prioritize, really, especially when he's looking at the Finnish roster.
Okay.
And his statement's really good, and I can't put it into words entirely. I'm going to paraphrase a bit, but essentially it's to do with the scheduling, right? If you're chasing phrase we learned from Ukrainian, if you're chasing 2 rabbits, you'll catch none. Is essentially the summary of it.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Have you been chasing a lot of rabbits in Ukraine?
Yeah, fit that in. Yeah, we went on a city tour yesterday. One of the Ukrainian expressions, obviously in Ukrainian, but it's relevant to this because they wanted to focus on one thing rather than the others. I can't say that for what other countries did. That's just the insight Seda gave to Finland. That being said, I definitely think there's a few players that I would have liked to have seen on the rosters. The one that stands out to me the most is and this is going to be I think it's a little bit of flame, but I think that Lolsish should have been on the Swedish roster rather than Johnny, personally. But that's hard to say because we haven't seen what Reinforced likes. He hasn't been in the public spotlight playing for like a year.
Yeah.
But Lolsish has been one of the strongest main tanks in Europe, from what I can tell. So it's a little bit weird not to see him, but obviously behind the scenes, we don't have access to the Swedish scrim, so we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of counter that point in that I'd say, I think for a lot of the guys who are building these rosters, they're thinking Overwatch League players as best we can because we know they're all roughly going to be following the same sort of schedule. We haven't got to spend any time getting a Contenders player up to the stage where you're saying, right, here's how we train, here's how things work, here's the standard of communication in Overwatch League that you might not have experienced before. it's kind of straight away you can hit the ground running and I think get into it immediately. And a lot of these players will know each other either from playing against each other or from just being in the same area and obviously playing together, living together, going out together, whatever it might be. That synergy will already be there. And it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier on that a lot of players and coaches say is that the key difference between Overwatch League and Contenders is purely that synergy and teamwork and communication perspective. And I think if you can build a team that's already got that in place, for some coaches, it's more worthwhile to work on ironing out the kinks of those individual players from Overwatch League rather than having to kind of worry about your Overwatch League players who have got some needs that need to be met and your Contenders players on the other side who have got to have a certain amount of training before they can then meet the other Overwatch League players and kind of mix together. So although it's disappointing to not see some of them get picked up, it's just trying to minimize risk for a lot of these coaches. They do not want to go out in the group stages. They can help it because, well, everyone knows how the World Cup went for football. Everyone gets kind of like berated a bit if you go out super early on in the tournament.
I wouldn't. We don't know what that feels like.
No. Semi-finalists wouldn't know what that feels like.
No, it's perfectly fine.
I wanted
How
to
does South
drop.
Africa do, Sam?
I was about to say I wanted to drop a flame here, but then I was just like, your team can't even qualify for the World Cup, so keep your mouth shut.
That's why I love it every time the Americans try and give a shit. But to be fair, then they just don't care about the sport enough for it to be like a sick burn back on them. They're just like, what, you kick a ball? It boggles my mind that they call that shit football that they do with the hand egg thing. It is nonsense. Anyway,
I like that they call their Super Bowl champions world champions. It's
Yeah,
like you're the
right.
only country that competes in the sport. Like,
Nonsense.
congratulations.
absolute nonsense. Makes no sense. Also, I love that the Overwatch League finals is a win for England either way. Either we have the London Spitfire taking the trophy home back to England, obviously back to London. Where else would they go with the trophy?
Obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful
Yeah.
British lads. Or it's Boombox walking away with the trophy, and
Right.
obviously as captain of the team,
Mhm.
he's going to take it back to England, isn't he? So either way, we win. UK
I do like
esports.
that. I do like the London Spitfire players have adopted "It's Coming Home" as well. I've seen loads of the
I know,
players
right? The
streaming
memes
Oh,
are
yeah.
great.
with MS Paint writing "It's Coming Home." I
Fury's
think,
actually a big football fan as well. The few times
he?
we've been
Really?
around, the few times we've been around to the Spitfire place, he's always watching like highlights or World Cup highlights or like matches from different stuff. So yeah, Fury's
Oh, what a boy.
a big football head from the few interactions I've had with him, albeit in Korean as well. So what do I know? I haven't tapped into his soul.
Do you know who he supports?
I've no fucking idea. I'm not a football guy myself, so
Millwall.
What's the money on it being Manchester United?
No, Millwall. That's who he supports.
Oh,
Yeah.
come on now.
He's a little bit rough.
Yeah,
looking.
he looks like
Yeah,
a kind
yeah.
of guy who likes a good brawl on a Saturday afternoon.
I think definitely Prophet would have his back there, wouldn't he? All right, so in terms of the World Cup, fine. I think there is an argument to be made, though, as well, that some of these coaches should be looking at the World Cup as an opportunity to train up some Contenders players to potentially use them for our talent in the future. Because the fuck is the World Cup? It's a series of show matches. Like Blizzard brand it as a celebration of Overwatch. It's not supposed to be the most hardcore competition in the entire world, like the pinnacle of esports.
You know people take this super seriously. You can't say that. If any coach
Plebs
turn
take
around,
it seriously.
I take it seriously. I'm a pleb, then there we go.
Okay.
When you
To be
say
honest
that,
with
on
you, if any, I'll say it, mate. Sure. If any supporter came into this and said, "Okay, our coach was we're not taking this seriously. They're here to train some players for Overwatch," they'd be like, "This is fucking shit. You should be trying to win this. It's national pride on the line."
you don't say that to them. You just do it.
Exactly. Tayron got nano boosted as a fucking Symmetra in the first World Cup. So I mean, everything is now completely off limits, or rather, nothing is off limits. So with the World Cup set aside, then, because that is the first thing. But if you're looking towards Overwatch League Season 2, or maybe even looking at Overwatch League Season 1 right now, are there any players that you think would have been really good picks from Europe as people that you would either say are Owl caliber now, or if they had been picked up at the beginning of Owl, would have been Owl caliber, or if they're going to be picked up for Season 2, these are like definite shouts? Who would if people are trying to key in on like star players that they should be watching because they're interested in Owl and want to see the future potential stars of Owl, who would your picks be?
Aside from the names we mentioned earlier on, I would actually give a shout out to Chow from CIS Hope, their flex tank. He has had a rough ride through Contenders, you might say. He came into it as a super aggressive diva player, acknowledges himself. He's very, very self-aware of his own mistakes, which is always something you want in a player. And he's improved. And to be honest with you, I think CIS Hope were looking strong before. The reason they're looking even stronger now a lot of it comes down to him and his leadership. He's always the guy who talks to us on interviews. He's the most chatty member of the team. Although Eng is actually the captain, Chow is the guy who does all the kind of legwork, I think, in a way. And to be honest with you, he is the core of that team. And normally it's not really the flex tank you put down as the core of a team. For them in this case, I think he is through and through. And I would be surprised if he didn't even get any kind of look in from an Overwatch League team. I would fully expect him to get a trial at some point.
Good English skills?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty good.
He lives in the UK.
Oh, right. Solid. Yeah, because that's the thing as well with a lot of people, not so much from EU, although you do have some like national teams that don't speak as much. But certainly when we're talking about Korean players that are coming up, it's like super important to know whether or not they actually speak English to a degree enough to be able to play in an English-speaking team, right? So, all
Yeah.
right, which other players come to mind? And feel free to repeat anyone we've talked about before, because we covered a lot.
There's another one from CIS Hope. Sharek, main tank. Sharek is a phenomenal Reinhardt player and pretty good Winston as well. So is Orisa not really been shown too much, but that's not really CIS Hope's style. I don't think he even plays it when they play Orisa. But Sharek's one to highlight on that one as well, I think. And then to throw out another counter. What?
What about RCK?
Des, I'm not going to lie to you, mate. That's exactly where I was going. I was going to say,
No surprise. I was amazed he
argument.
was not your first name.
Throw out another argument to another Diva player, another off tank is RCK. If you could literally stitch together Diva Bomb highlights from nearly every match he plays. He's always getting multi-man kills with the Diva Bombs. He's always everywhere. And if you look at the back line when they're under pressure, you see RCK flying back with the defense matrix. You rarely catch that action in contenders. I'm not saying it doesn't happen from other players, but you always tend to notice it the most, I say, from players like Chow and like RCK as well. I think RCK and Chow are the two best Diva players, two best off tanks we have in Europe right now.
I think I'd go with, I was going to say, I'm going to go with Des, and I really think Chow, but also, like, I mean, the complete romantic in me is like, just because we know their story so far, wouldn't it be awesome if someone picked up CIS Hope as a whole team and gave them the stuff? I mean, that's the romantic story.
I would love that.
But definitely Chow. I think he's impressive and speaks really good English, cheeky little shit, funny, quite engaging. I know because I have to interview him. I never know what I'm getting from him. He's really fun, and I think that he's fun to talk to. He's fun to be around and to engage with, but at the same time, he just plays really well. I do think, like Dave said, I'd be surprised if someone doesn't trial him at the end of the day.
There's one of the. This one's not really an individual player. It's actually a duo. Lulsish and Elivo from Angry Titans are a team that we speak about a lot. Again, their whole gaming history together has been quite a phenomenal story anyway, but they really underpin the backbone of that Angry Titans team, both when they're playing Dive and when they're playing Quad Tank like they did for all of last season. And we've all spoke about them at quite great length and said, can you literally name a better duo in all of Overwatch? And to be honest with you, the answer is probably no. And I think if they're going to get picked up, they need to go as a duo, because we saw 1 week where Lulch just played with a sub-in when Elevote couldn't play. He just looked lost. He was constantly looking around to see where his Diva was, double-checking the positioning was correct and all that kind of stuff. And they lost in that week quite decisively. When they play together, Lulcish knows full well Elevote is backing him up, and he just plays at his absolute best, and vice versa. Lulcish makes the room for Elevote to really shine on off-tank. So I think those two as a duo, they have to go together.
Speaking of other duos to take up as well, it's another Giganti duo, but the backline from Giganti, Ripper and Master, support duo, those guys, absolutely amazing. They're, I think they're OWL caliber at current state. I think you could put them onto, I'd say, any more Western-focused team, and it will be maybe not on par right away, but give it like a month of OWL or like just scrim time. They'll be level enough to play, and they might even be improvements on some of the teams.
They don't really shine the most as the brightest supports when you watch them. I think like you'll see players like Ding, like Kodak, like Hip, for example, who in the kill feed on Zen will be getting multiple kills. But it's more just a boat one. The backline for Giganti is incredibly hard to kill because they are always looking out for each other, as well as having RCK back to defend them. And you got to consider that they just enable this team to push so aggressively all the time, and just enables Giganti to be at their very best. That's probably the best thing about Giganti is they all enable each other. Even in the crazy strats they pull off, they still manage to make things work.
That's pretty interesting that you say that as well, because that's a little bit of the style that Big Goose and Shaz had when they played under Seta as well as a coach when they played for Giganti. So I wonder how much of that is actually coming from Seta being able to coach backline players, because I had not heard of Massa coming into it, although I had seen Ripper, I think he played for Ents before. Yeah, he played for Ents before as a support, and he was always pretty good, but I hadn't I haven't really focused on that backline in action over the few games that I've caught them. It's pretty
It,
interesting.
yeah, it's when you speak to a lot of the players as well. Ripper and Mouser are respected as one of the best backlines in Contenders by the players as well.
Yeah, yeah.
They even say that they are better than their backlines most of the time as well. At least that was the case in season 1. I don't know if it's still the case or the sentiment's still the same in season 2. But they're touted as one of the best support duos, and they're like I said, I keep using the word, but they're not as visceral, they're not as easy to notice on stream. But the effects are being had, and it is allowing this team to be more aggressive and be a little bit more confident in what they're doing, and it really does show in their gameplay.
As a final note to tick off, right? If somebody's been lured in by your marketing pitch of Contenders EU and now wants to catch some games, but they're like, mate, Owl's just finished. I've got a bit of free time, but I don't have all the time in the world. You know, I've got to check out lots of regions of Contenders. What are the big matches coming up that you think are going to be sick? Like what are the things that you are looking forward to? Because I got the schedule up now, and I can see some fat ones. But what are you guys looking forward to?
The fattest one of all, the last game of group stage, CIS Hope versus Giganti. The stakes of that get elevated so much based off of this week. If they both win their matches this week, which they should do, only one team in Group B can be undefeated and take the first spot, and that's literally decided by the final match of group stage. That's the game of the season right there.
I think this is... Go on, sorry.
I was just saying I can't disagree with Trid. I think that game is going to be incredible. I also think it's going to decide a lot of things in terms of groups, how they were weighted, things like that. We can finally see if it was the stronger group, if you like. I just think everything is going to come down to that game. So that's the one, if you could only pick one, that's the one you have to watch.
There's an alternative as well on that same week. So in the final week, British Hurricane have the deciding game as to whether or not they end up relegated potentially. So that'll be a big one to watch. Sure, it's not maybe on the real positive, Clash of Titans note that you get with the other series. But if you want to see how last season's champions really fight when they're under pressure, have they managed to crack it or not? They're playing in that final week against August and Hungary, I think it is the second game on July 30th. That's 100% worth watching as well.
Fun thing to note about that matchup as well. The last time August and Hungary and British Hurricane faced, albeit August and Hungary had a different roster, August and Hungary 4-0'd them in the group stage. So I imagine there's a little bit of bad blood there, where British Hurricane wanted to get their revenge.
Very spicy. What is the team that you find the most exciting to watch as well? If you were
Angry Titans.
Angry Titans?
Nice, quick and easy answer.
Yeah, I'd have to say Angry Titans as well. You think you get them pegged as like the one-dimensional team, and then they just pull out something new, and they just stop people with it. Sometimes it's just laughable.
It's but literally like I won't reveal too much. I've had a chat to them. If you want to see that sentence brought to life, a team that just keep on surprising you, this week's games is the one to watch. They've been trying some literally crazy stuff in scrims. Like you've not seen another team in the world play it yet. Keep an eye on them this week.
When they play against British Hurricane, right? That's this week. Yeah. That's their game.
Oh
this
boy.
Week.
And currently they have a lot of wiggle room to be creative, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have such a different opinion to you guys, and I know the team that excites me the most to watch. No, it's not actually about. It's Giganti, but it's not because of Shadow. It's because I actually think Seda is one of the smartest coaches I've seen in action, and I really do think watching them play. I know that we've seen them on or off, but like we saw them playing on Rialto, trying things that looked insane and crazy, and didn't work. But I feel like what is so much fun for me and exciting to watch Giganti is because I think that there's a lot of foundation and things that get built behind the scenes that they're working on. And for me, it's an exciting team to watch because the team dynamic and the way they work together is just really impressive. And you can see slowly but surely, I feel like Seda sits with like a box of Lego, and he's just slowly putting all the pieces together. And the time is coming where we will see the final product. And that's what excites me the most about Giganti, to be honest. As much as I love Angry Titans and I love watching CIS Hope, Giganti for me is the exciting one to watch.
All right, then let's finish with who's going to win, Giganti or CIS Hope. Let's see if your predictions are as bad as ours in now.
What were you, 0-5 or 0-4, was it?
Mate, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I was asking you the questions.
You got beaten by Bren, didn't you?
Oh, everyone got beaten by Bren because he just randomly picks.
Wasn't it? Everyone was 0-4, 0-4, 0-5, 2-5. It was,
yeah.
Your desk predictions are as bad as ours. Well, as bad as mine anyway. Don't worry about that.
A broken clock is right 2 out of 5 times. That's what they say. And Bren is definitely a broken clock. Now go on,
Yeah,
who's going to
well-
win? Giganti or CIS Hope, if you had to put your money somewhere?
CIS Hope.
Go
They're
on,
going to
Sam.
hate me for that because they think I'm the fanboy, but CIS Hope, I think they've got it this season.
So here's my thing, right? Is my desk predictions are actually quite good this season, and I've been getting more right. So I'm not ready to say because I actually want to see them both play this week before I make a call.
Okay.
So I'm gonna be the Trid in this situation and refuse to put an answer. And I want to see them play one more week, and then I will make a proper decision.
That's the
The,
coward's
the
way out.
reason Sam has more right
Right.
predictions is because she gets to have twice as many attempts.
Right.
Sure.
Unless you divide, you say twice as many, but if you divide them
Yeah.
by 2, I'm still on the top of the leaderboard. Just putting it out there. But
Have you been
purely by
tracking
luck.
them?
Yes, I have, because I'm quite proud of having it. Get right.
It's a real hard one. It's going to rely. I'm going to say CIS Hope as well, but as a kind of precursor to that, if Davon has one of his top tier weeks where he plays really well on the Widow, because he's got a matchup against Kenzie, who's also a fantastic Widowmaker player. If Davon pops off and shows up, Giganti. If not, it's going to CIS Hope.
Sweet.
It's a bit of a soft answer as well, but there's a few
Okay.
criteria that kind of dictate which way it goes, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Predictions are nonsense. Just pick a
Right.
team.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more that goes into it than that.
How many
People
times,
don't
how
understand.
many
Never
times were
believe
Shanghai
us.
Dragons predicted to win in the OWL season?
I think twice, both by Bren, which tells you
Yes.
everything you need to know. But
I used to choose Bazooka Puppies in season 1 just because they had a cool name. So I think that
But
tells
yeah,
you everything
fair,
about
fair.
predictions.
yeah, exactly. And a cool logo, as we said before.
Yes, they
So,
do.
so that game, Giganti CIS Hope, July 31st, 1 p.m. Pacific time. If you're watching this and you happen to be living in LA, I don't know what time it is anywhere else in the world. But there you go. That was Catching Up with Contenders EU. I hope you thoroughly caught up, everybody, and thank you for joining me, you guys.
No problem.
Yep, no worries.